Say what you will about old games, but at least when we bought a game, we got the whole game. Has that actually been true, though? So as usual, I'm cruising around the Fandom Night group page on Facebook. We have like 4 or 5 group pages. It's a good idea to get on those group pages. Specifically, the one that leads back directly to me is always in my comment section below, along with my Twitter handle and things like that. If you ever want to get a hold of me, yada yada, follow me, blah blah blah. But anyways, I came across this picture, and I've made this argument multiple times. The argument that back when I bought a game, the game was complete and I didn't have to worry one way or another and yada yada and so on and so forth. And you know what? I still stick to that. I still stick to that. I do believe that a game should come out in its final format. That we shouldn't have to constantly update the game to be able to play the game, and then if later on we don't have those updates, we're literally dealing with an inferior version that may very well screw us 10 years down the road if we don't have said updates to play said game, and for whatever reason, game has a game-breaking glitch in the first or second level. That's a big deal. Big deal. But it also means that we never updated these old games to fix them, and some of them did not stand the test of time because they were broken when they were released. So, we took what we got. But I got to thinking. From a certain point of view, you could say that we've never been given the full game. Ever. Think about things like Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden was first in the arcade and was a very different game. Very different game. It was kind of a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Not a side-scrolling action ninja crazy game with cutscenes and everything else. And I would argue that the Nintendo port, which is a weird thing to say, because, technically, do I consider it a port? Because, it's Ninja Gaiden. It has the same name as the arcade version, but it's not the same game. It's like a completely different version. And we've come across this with different things in the past that are oftentimes we were playing lower versions of the actual game, such as, let's say, and this comes down to the systems at the time, and it was great to have something rather than nothing. And that's part of the reason that we just accepted it. But I remember growing up, and I wasn't prominently hardcore growing up in the arcades. I was coming into the end of it, okay? I was in the arcades as early as like 90 and 91. I was born in 84, around 7, 8 years old. It was a normal thing for me to be able to kind of be in the arcades with my dad. And around 94, it was a more socially acceptable thing when he would take me to the arcade and he would kind of drop me off. And if he had a bunch of shopping or something to do, when I was 10 or whatever, he'd be like, we're going to do this. There you go. It was in a mall. The arcade was in the mall, and I remember there were a lot of different times that in order to kind of keep me happy, we would haul off to the arcade, and I would kind of like play arcade games here and there with whatever money he'd give me, like $5 or something like that, and then he would kind of sit around while I played some arcade games, and then my stepmom would go and get the shopping done or whatever. And then I also remember that as I grew up, I kind of hit the arcade scene as I got old enough to actually do so myself, because the arcade scene for my area was still relatively active until around, say, maybe 2008, we still had we had like a 2-story arcade that was in our area, and we had like Aladdin's Castle that was in the mall, and there was another one that was at a Pekin Mall, and so like we had choices of arcades, and then there were arcades that were not but like an hour away from us, where a girlfriend that I had when I very first moved out on my own and started getting that part of my life put down in stone. I had a girlfriend that was part of the DDR competitions, and she was like a state champion, and so we traveled around the state and whatnot. I hit different arcades and whatnot, so I had a bit of an arcade life, and it never really stopped to really hit me that we've always been kind of playing lesser games, like always. Street Fighter on the Super Nintendo may be your best choice, but it was not the arcade game that we were playing in the arcades. It was not. And think about something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 1980s game. We played that arcade game and it was a very different game than when we took it home and got it on the Nintendo as the arcade game. It was not the same game. It tried to be, but it was not the same game. And then, of course, we went on to do better Turtles games, and then, of course, we have other games, which I would even argue that while Turtles in Time is a superior game, leaps and bounds a superior game over the original arcade game, I don't remember there being an arcade cabinet for Turtles in Time. Wait, no, there was. There was, and it was better. I do remember it now. It's hitting me. I remember the four panels. I remember all 4 people being able to play. I remember throwing the guys at the screen. There was an arcade game. Unless I'm remembering something that didn't really happen, there was an arcade game, and it was better. It was legitimately better. First off, 4 players, better. Better graphics, better. Better sound, better. It was better. And I think it had that, if I remember right, during the time that I was going to the arcade, it used to play Pizza Power. Huh. We didn't get the actual version of Samurai Showdown. We got a lesser version. I'm talking about the home consoles. The same thing that a lot of these people are talking about when they reference this meme. They're like, hey, when I used to get a game for my Super Nintendo, it was the final product. But it wasn't. It was actually a downsized product that sometimes didn't get all the characters, all the features, all the voices, all the sounds, or all the graphics. It was a port. And 90% of the time, that port was not as good as what you had in the arcade. Just the fight sticks alone, the controls that you had for Street Fighter, not even including the graphics and the fact that you didn't get all the characters. Huh. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud when I saw this meme. I kind of wanted to go over it and kind of literally think in real time and show, like my show is very unscripted. And as I've kind of really played into this is a podcast, talk show, on the fly, me thinking type of thing. I want to hit more topics like this where I really consider it. Punch-Out was not the same. Punch-Out in the arcade it was about the exact same game, but it had a slightly different fight system because of the controls that you had, and you saw through Mac. He was a wireframe, and there was a lot more detail in the fighter that was up with you and fighting with you. So if you think back to that, we got a massively lesser port for the Nintendo. So once again, we didn't necessarily get the finished game. We got what they could give to us. I mean, there's still an argument to be made, and I will still make the argument plenty of times that the game was what you were going to get when you got it back then. If you got the game, you got the game. And that's the way it was going to be. And if you put it in 20 years from now, it's going to be the same game that you remember playing on the Super Nintendo or whatever else thing that you were playing it on. It's going to be the same game. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, because if you're wearing your rose goggles, your rose-tinted nostalgia goggles, you may come across a time when you remember that this was like one of the coolest games of your childhood, and boy, did it not age well. And going back, you're going to figure that out because you can't make the argument, I remember it being better when I was a kid. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. Yeah. Mortal Kombat 2. Yeah, it was way better in the arcades. I remember I put a lot of time into that in the arcade. I discovered it. I remember me and Dad were already playing Mortal Kombat 1, and we didn't really know about Mortal Kombat 2 yet. And then I remember we went to this, there was a place I used to go to called Landmark. And as you walked into the bowling alley, there was a little arcade off to the side. And as we walked in, we heard it. We heard this dude scream. And we looked over into that little bitty arcade and was like, holy shit, that's a new Mortal Kombat. And we went in there, and I'll never forget the first fight I ever witnessed in that game in my life was my dad picked Liu Kang and he fought Baraka. He lost that fight, and at the end of the very first fight that I'd ever seen in the history of my frickin' life, the first time I ever saw Mortal Kombat 2 was a chance hit at the arcade. That was the first fight, and it ended with an actual fatality. So 1/4 went into the machine, Dad played, Dad lost, and he was like, dun dun dun, and he shing, and he stabs Liu Kang and picks him up, and Liu Kang is like, and slides down, and I was like, oh my god. Holy shit. And so we broke out, we put about $5 or so into the machine, got our quarters, played a couple rounds. I mainly lost. I was not a competent gamer yet. My dad was older, understood the mechanics and things like that, and I was just like, I'm playing a game, I'm the best. And even though I was getting good by the time Mortal Kombat 2 came along, my dad still had the edge in gaming, probably till I was around like 15 or so. Because my dad actually played games. Yeah, so like, that's crazy. But I remember when I brought it home, while it was really cool to have it on the SNES, it was not the same game as the arcade. And I very often, when I made trips out to the theater, which was every other week, my dad liked to see movies for what it was worth, and oftentimes we checked the paper and see if there was something going on. And if there was a movie that was good enough, we were hitting the theater. And so, like, when I think back on that, I was playing in the theater, I was playing in the arcade and I was playing at home, and the version that I got at home was never arcade quality. Which offers the question, did I ever get the full game? Not until years later. In fact, I think it wasn't until the PlayStation when they released something on the PlayStation. I'm almost positive it was the PlayStation where they released the actual arcade games. The full playable original arcade quality games. And now it's crazy to think how far we've come because, damn it, being 37, nearing that 40 benchmark, and really looking back at how gaming has changed over the years, it is crazy for me to think that, like, now, my daughter has the full Mortal Kombat arcade in all of its original quality and sound and everything on a machine about that big. A portable arcade machine that is literally a full port of the arcade game in all of its glory, all of its sound, all of its graphics on a screen about that friggin' big. It's about that big. This is a screen. It's ridiculous. But, like, it's there. And now I look at this meme and I stop and I think, you know, we always had lesser versions of games. We just didn't think of it that way. But now we can match arcade quality. But maybe there's an argument that nobody's making that it's a better time in gaming than it was, because now if you get an arcade fighter, say like Injustice 2, and you get Zod, and for whatever reason his low kick doesn't work, it can't make connection with enemy characters. So if you're playing two players and you duck and hit low kick, it'll slide through the other guy's foot every time and never hit them, and it breaks your combos, and the character is mainly worthless and unusable. And yes, if I remember right, that was a real thing when they first released him. They had to release a patch that fixed his low kick because his low kick had no collision detection or some shit like that. I seem to remember that being a real thing. But now they can fix these problems. And so yes, while updates are ridiculous and it would be best, I still make the argument necessarily that it would be best if we just got the game and it was finished when we got it and stop with all this upgrade shit. But at the same time, isn't it nice that they support games much longer? Because they could still just release games and get your money, and they've already got your money. They've already got your money. DLC is not the argument we're having here. We're having an update argument. I almost feel like we get more value for our game now than we did back then. If you bought Street Fighter and it was broken and it wasn't balanced properly and there was a character that was standout and that was just the best character and you just had to deal with it and fuck you, that's what it was, and that's what it will forever be. But if you get Street Fighter today, they are constantly doing balances by watching tournaments and working with professional gamers that know this game even better than the programmers in some cases. And it is because of that that they're able to go back and nerf out certain things and fix things that simply don't work or break the game. And as they fix it, you get a better game of a higher quality for a longer time than the fact that this game is broken day one and there's nothing you can do about it except for have a broken game. I don't know. It's an argument. It's an argument that can possibly be argued on either side, and either side can necessarily be right. But I really think that maybe we should put a little thought into this before we automatically demonize the fact that updates are happening. Because I guess if we were still living in the Super Nintendo days, these games that are, quote, rushed to market would just be rushed to market. And if you think that that wasn't happening back then, you are dead wrong. There are literally game-breaking bugs that exist in SNES games that if they'd have known about it, they could have fixed it. And I'm talking huge game-breaking bugs. I'm talking about bugs that will wipe the entirety of your cart, like in Final Fantasy VI, when Realm sketches an enemy, and then the enemy uses a very specific attack that hits the enemy that she sketched, and it deletes the cart. Holy shit! Or what about in PlayStation 2, or even PlayStation 1? What about the Final Fantasy VII save glitch? Where if you saved a Final Fantasy, if you saved Final Fantasy VII and then saved another specific game from a specific programmer after you'd played Final Fantasy and go back to Final Fantasy VII, the save file corrupts. It doesn't work. And the same thing in Soul Calibur 3. If you play Soul Calibur 3 and you save Soul Calibur 3 and then you don't have it on its own card and you save something else on that card, for whatever reason, there is a glitch with certain companies, certain games, the way they save, that if they save on the card and Soul Calibur 3 was not the last game saved, it will corrupt the Soul Calibur 3 data. They won't fix that ever. That game, until we get some sort of HD remastery re-release of Soul Calibur 1, 2, and 3 in some sort of special pack, it will not be fixed. It will just be broken forever. Forever, that game will be broken. It will not work. Ever. Don't you kind of wish they were running some updates back then? Because those games, they thought they were done and they rushed them out to market. And it wouldn't have taken much to save Soul Calibur 3 on a card where somebody else in the testing room was also playing 4 or 5 other games, and they go back to part 3 and for some reason it won't load, and they gotta be like, hey man, there's something wrong with the saving in Soul Calibur 3. Address it. They didn't do that. They rushed it to market and there was nobody to talk about it later. And even though us as a group of consumers found this glitch and said, this is a game-breaking bug. Can you fix it? No, they can't. Without literally remaking Soul Calibur 3 and putting out another game, it can't be fixed. There's an argument to be made that gaming is in a better place now than it ever was when you were a kid and just got the whole game when you got it. Well, okay. We've been on this topic for about 20 minutes. I hope you gauged something out of it. I hope you got something out of it. I feel like I kind of did. I feel like I might really consider the next time I go to make this argument, because you got to be careful about letting nostalgia control the way you feel about old games. It's not necessarily that it was always better. Not that the new stuff is always better. There are things I miss. But, maybe updates, we're not arguing DLC, maybe this constant updating stuff is a good thing. I'm going to get out of here.
I have spoken. Take what you will from it.